Welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Sana Maqbool, with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be taking a look at the Supreme Court's verdict yesterday with regards to the Deputy Speaker's decision on April 3rd with regards to dismissal of the no confidence motion. The Supreme Court's verdict has overturned this decision by the Deputy Speaker and has also overturned the decision by the President for the dissolution of the National Assembly. Right now, the Assembly stand reinstated and the decision has been overturned, which means that tomorrow there will be a National Assembly session. It has been called on Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and the Supreme Court's verdict also states that voting on the no confidence motion will be taking place tomorrow. This short order is also with regards to takes a look at Article 63 and talks about how it shall have no impact on that as well, and that is going to be as per the Constitution. We're going to hear more on that later as well, but the impact of the decision, the verdict by the Supreme Court yesterday, is huge with regards to what is going to happen tomorrow in the National Assembly, the future of the political parties, the opposition and the current government, what options are there on the table for the PTI at the moment with regards to the no confidence motion, since of course previously prior to April 3rd we understand that the numbers were not in favor of the PTI. What is going to happen tomorrow, of course, still is a big question mark, but we'll discuss this in further detail, the impact of the Supreme Court's verdict, the decision on the political process in the country, and then the options that we have on the table from the PTI and the opposition parties as well, and what is going to be the future political scenario of the country. In our second segment, we'll also be taking a look at the situation with regards to the Ukrainian crisis in Russia. What has happened in a recent development is that the UN General Assembly has voted out Russia from the Human Rights Council, the second time that any country has been done so, with Libya being done so in 2011. This, of course, is another blow to Russia after an increasing number of sanctions that have been put in place by various countries in the aftermath of its military intervention in Ukraine. What is going to be the impact of this decision on Russia, how the sanctions continue to affect the country, and we also know that a Russian mission to the UN has also given a memo to different countries reportedly and has talked about how any decision to vote out Russia is going to have negative consequences for that country, and also going to result in sour diplomatic relations. We're going to take a look at how exactly that is going to transpire. What plans does Russia actually have with regards to its foreign policy, since of course it's being burdened with a lot of sanctions at the moment. For this and more, I have with me in the studios, as always, Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment, we've also been joined online by Sardar Balsher Koza, who's an advocate of the Supreme Court, and we've also been joined by Meher Tara, who's a political analyst. Thank you very much for joining us online. I'll start with you, Mr. Koza. When we look at what is happening in the country. I'll start with you, Meher, since I think we're still going to be joined by Mr. Kosa. When we look at what has happened yesterday with regards to the Supreme Court's verdict, of course, there is a lot of praise for the Supreme Court's decision with regards to upholding the constitutions, and that's there. But when we look at the impact that this is going to have on the political scenario, that is, of course, going to be huge for both the opposition and the PTI as well. There have been a lot of things that have been said prior to this verdict. How do you think that the narratives that the opposition parties and particularly the PTI have been putting forward in terms of any future elections is going to get impacted now that this decision has come out?
Hi, can you hear me?
Mr. Kosa, I'll come to you. Let me ask this question from Ms. Meher, and I'll come back to you.
I couldn't really hear you, so maybe Mr. Kosa could answer this question.
All right, sure. Mr. Kosa, did you hear the question?
Yes, I think so.
Go ahead, please.
We had enough of the happening and unconstitutional scenario which has been going on, and it has been well settled and well taken care by the Honorable Supreme Court of Pakistan, by the bench. And after the definition being explained at length, the Constitution, so I don't think so there is anything which the Honorable Prime Minister could do or could give any surprise to the nation. The only surprise which is awaited now, to my constitutional, professional and legal academia, is the Prime Minister may resign or he has to face the music of vote of no confidence. So that's the only remedy available after the verdict laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court of Rajasthan. And
Right. However, Mr.
nevertheless,
Khosa, the
well, I'm
statements
at
that
a
have been
place
coming
where
from the Prime Minister state otherwise, they indicate that he is going to be playing till the last ball, or that there are other options which don't really move towards the toppling of the government. So what could that possibly be?
I think the Prime Minister is a good man by heart, by soul. He wants to deliver, but the legal team which he's having in his surroundings is taking him to the down to the drains. So there is nothing he can do anything right now after the definition, after the judgment, after the constitution being defined at length that what maximum the powers of the National Assembly and the speakers under the Constitution 58 is going to be. So there is
Right,
nothing
Khosa
he
sir,
can
that is
do.
very
There is
important.
only
But
one
let me ask
thing
you
he can
another
do.
question.
The last ball
Because
which he has played is the unconstitutional corridor which he has adopted
Khosa
and which
sir,
has
can you
been
hear me?
turned down. The ball has been turned down. The googly has been turned down by the Honorable Supreme Court of Pakistan, and he has been knocked out.
All
Right.
right.
Khosa sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Right. The question was, I had to ask another question regarding Article 63A and how it is going to be applied tomorrow. We know that from the Treasury benches, there are defectors who are going to vote against the government. Tomorrow, I see that despite not having all the defectors, the opposition might be able to, actually topple the apple cart. But even then, if the defectors also join in, do you think that they will be unseated immediately?
No, not at all. The process has to be taken care by the Election Commission of Pakistan, and it runs as per the law of the land. That is the CPC. They will be served a notice from the chairman of the party, and the chairman of they have to get an explanation, and after that the chairman of the party has to send the reference to the Chief Election Commission. The Chief Election Commission is going to have their trial, and in that trial, it's going to take like ages, and it is never decided. We have had the cases of Firdaus
Right.
Ashifawan and so many others who defected from the party.
Right. Khosa sahab, I hope again you can hear me. So the people who have defected can essentially vote in the next Prime Minister, and then they might be de-seated. Is it true?
Absolutely. This is what the constitution is all about.
Yeah. So, Mayor, I wanted to ask about Election Commission of Pakistan. Do you believe that in yesterday's verdict, Election Commission of Pakistan, because they maintained that right now they are not ready to have an election, especially they mentioned around 6 months figure. So, could we say that they have actually affected the decision, yesterday's decision?
Hi, thank you. Everything that has happened in the last few days is just, I mean, it's just it's blown my mind away. I thought things had changed in Pakistan. I thought what had happened in 1977, 1990, 93, 99, 2012, 2017, it would not happen again. I was one of those idealists that I thought this would not happen again. I'm not going to comment on the decision of the Supreme Court, because obviously whatever they have decided is on merit. But what your question about ECP is connected to everything else that has happened in the last few days. Everyone can see that, even people who do not support Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf or highly critical of Imran Khan, as long as they are supporters of PDM, they're like political supporters, or they're supporters in media or on social media. They happen to be everywhere in the world. For once, PDM has support all over the world. It's very surprising. The only thing they are all trying to do is to oust a prime minister. I call this an ouster. I call this a coup. A prime minister is being ousted for no other reason than the fact that there are forces that do not want Imran Khan to be the prime minister of Pakistan anymore. It's as simple as that. And ECP is part of part of that whole thing. They
Right,
will not
but
have.
There is
there's
another situation, Meher, in which, of course, we know that Prime Minister Imran Khan, obviously, last time when they came up with that surprise, just a day before that, they had the resignations of their Member of Parliaments, both from provincial and the national one as well. So if they go along with this now, that they give their resignations, all of them, what kind of political scenario are you looking at then?
I mean that they keep saying that it's perfectly fine. I think there were 100 PTI had 155 members before some of them decided to become dissidents or their consciences were roused out of sleep, or suddenly they became aware of how bad a Prime Minister Imran Khan was. That they think the other side thinks that it's perfectly fine that all of them 100 plus people will resign and by-elections will take place. And but if that can happen, then Pakistan should also the election commission should announce normal regular elections. The thing is, everything as I said, it's not about this has happened and not that has happened. Constitution help, the sanctity of constitution is important. It's very convenient.
Absolutely. Ms. Meher, I want to ask you a question that initially I put forward with regards to the narratives of different political parties. An important part of PTI's narrative obviously was becoming the fact that the opposition parties are guilty of committing treason as well. With the verdict of the Supreme Court coming out, how do you think this has impacted the way moving forward PTI is going to run for the elections?
Look, what has happened 3 weeks ago. I was talking to a cousin who's a member of PMLN, and I was laughing that if you were to running the elections right now, where PMLN would sweep the elections in Punjab just because of the inflation issue. And she very wisely nodded her head, and we were just chattering. We were just having cousin to cousin chat. Now, I'm so sorry. My dog has started to bark. I have to mute him for a second.
That's fine.
Yes, we can.
It's all natural.
I'm so sorry.
Meher, let me actually come back to you so that we can hear you properly as well. I'll go to you, Khosa Saab. When we look at the verdict of the Supreme Court, there has been a talk with regards to how perhaps the horse trading issue has not been condoned. Is this something that is by default or an impact of the Supreme Court's verdict? Because this is something that has come out and it is stated clearly in the court as well that it will not impact Article 63A. Does it anyway, the decision that has come yesterday, damage or hurt Article 63A?
Just see the decision. The decision has very loudly and clearly has said so. It has not said any word about the horse trading or about the defying from the party policy. It has clearly said so. The petition was there, which was taken up by the Honorable Chief Justice of Pakistan regarding the motion which was pending before the House Speaker of the Assembly, who has to take the issue in hand and decide it at first. And when the motion of no confidence is there, no other motion can be taken up, and no other motion can overrule that. And that is the judgment of the Supreme Court of Pakistan regarding the defying. There is a procedure as per the constitutional amendment that has to follow. That Supreme Court cannot direct or follow. Supreme Court can only see those things which the National Assembly or any bureaucracy or any department has taken into hands, which is against the law and the constitution. So that is therefore has to be catered by the chairman of the party, issuing a notice, and then as per the civil procedure code, it has to run by the Election Commission of Pakistan for de-notifying them for horse trading, whatever you call it. So this is how the law and the constitution has to take place.
Right. Khosa Saab, regarding another very important thing, let us move into the space of hypotheticals. Let me ask you what happens if the entirety of PTI in the National Assembly decides to resign en masse today or tomorrow. Will it have any impact on vote of confidence or no confidence tomorrow, or whether it will have any impact on the functioning of the Parliament or National Assembly tomorrow?
I'll again go to the judgment of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. They resign. They don't resign. The heaven will not fall down. The Constitution and the Supreme Court judgment has to take its procedure place. First of all, the confidence will take place, and even if they resign, then the Speaker has to accept the resignation, and maybe it leads to the resolution of the Assembly. But let's see, let's hope what happens. But as per the Constitution and the law and the judgment which has been laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court of Pakistan, they cannot resign because there is no motion as regarding resignations yet to be pending or before the Speaker of the National Assembly. The Speaker of the National Assembly on Saturday.
All right, Farrukh, let me just welcome in the show our guest as well, and then you can go ahead with another question. Thank you so much, Khosa Sahab, for joining us. Let me join in Mr. Mohammad Azhar Siddique, who's also a legal expert. Thank you for joining us in the debate, sir. Can you hear me? Mr. Azhar, can you hear me? All right, I think we've lost our connection again with Mr. Azhar. Mr. Khosa, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm with you. As I'm saying, I can only pray. I'm in Medina Sharif right now. Raza Rasul is in front of me. I can pray for Pakistan and the Assembly and the Constitution and the Supreme Court. That is the maximum I can do right now.
Thank you. Grateful.
Please do pray because we have been through this roller coaster in any case. But let me also ask you regarding the format of resignations that Faisal earlier was actually mentioning. We heard that most of those resignations that were collected were on a printed format that had the same format. Will the lack of individuality of a resignation signatures on a standard form-like paper, will that work, sir? Does that qualify as a resignation in front of the Speaker?
Not at all. It has to be through the legal procedure. It is just, I think, to surprise somebody is guiding the Honorable Prime Minister. I'm telling you again and again, he's a good man. He is a good person, but he is surrounded by evil. He needs to get rid of that. Otherwise, he'll go to the prince. So that's what it is.
Okay.
All right.
Balsheh Saab, as you are in Medina, I just wanted to ask you, what's more suitable for Pakistan right now? As we know that Prime Minister Imran Khan is ready to quit and he is ready to go towards the general elections. And of course, if we look at the PDM, PDM always wanted to oust Prime Minister Imran Khan. Wouldn't it be good for Pakistan and for people of Pakistan as well, the very people who feel disgruntled because their vote, their will is switching sides in the parliament? It is crossing the floors in the parliament, and they want them to go back to them and get their new vote from them. Wouldn't it be good that general election is there, oust Prime Minister and go for the general election and bring the fresh mandate?
Right, Faisal, actually the Prime Minister is not ready to quit. Let's just get that correct. And Ms. Meher, perhaps you can answer this question.
Do you want me to answer from my heart?
Let Ms. Meher answer the question. Khosa Sahab, I'll take this to Ms. Meher.
Khosa Sahab will take it to Meher Sahiba, but the question was actually aimed at you because you are in Medina. But regardless, Meher Sahiba, can you answer this?
Look, if the intention was to have fresh elections, then elections would happen in Pakistan. But there wouldn't have been so much hue and cry when Prime Minister Imran Khan dissolved the assembly and he announced elections in 90 days. This is not about election. This is not about following the constitution or upholding the constitution. It is about ousting one prime minister. One more prime minister is not being allowed to complete his term. It's as simple as that. And so the only reason why they want to come into power for a few months is they need to change certain rules. Everybody is aware of that. They are going to make sure that certain cases against certain people come to an end. They are taken off the exit control lists. The entire overseas vote is changed a system is changed.
All right, Ms. Meher, unfortunately we're out of time for this segment. Thank you so much, Ms. Meher Tara and Mr. Khosa for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And Khosa Sahab, do pray for us since you're in Medina right now, so we would really like for you to do that for us as well. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. With regards to our second segment, we're going to be taking a look at the situation in the aftermath and in the current situation with regards to the Ukrainian crisis. There has been a big development with reference to Russia. The UN General Assembly actually voted Russia out of the Human Rights Council. This is the second time a country has been done so after Libya was voted out in 2011. And of course, this is another blow after so many increasingly intense sanctions on Russia have been put in place since they intervened in Ukraine. And this is going to impact relationships of Russia with various other countries as well, as mentioned in the memo by the Russian mission, saying that it's going to have negative consequences from this as well. The only good thing to come out of this crisis so far is that Pink Floyd has decided to come out with a song, their first single after 1994. So that's one thing that I would like to listen to. Farrukh, when we look at the situation with regards to this crisis, as we've been talking about this for a long time, and now we've seen different sanctions and the impact that it can possibly have on nations. But when we look at being voting out of the Human Rights Council, what does that mean in terms of Russia's position in the international community, or how it's going to take its relationships forward with any country?
Right. I think it is very important to remember that this council actually exists to focus on human rights. And recently you have seen an episode in Mariupol where human rights violations were accused and they were actually documented as well. In fact, President Zelensky took the matter to the UNSC, and there he said that either expel Russia from the UNSC or then disband yourself. That is a very major statement, right? You have to remember that human rights violations, they are members of this body who might still be actually indulging in human rights violations, but despite that, it is a kind of wake-up call for all Russians that whatever happened in Mariupol, whatever happened in Ukraine should not be allowed. Apart from that, I don't think there's any importance of this apart from symbolic value, because even as we speak, Russia remains a full veto member of the UNSC, and it has all the powers it wanted to have.
All right. Let me also welcome in the show Mr. Leonard Savin, who is a senior analyst, and Professor Scott Lucas, who's a political analyst, and they've joined us to talk more about this issue. Thank you very much for being a part of the debate. Can you hear me?
Hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Scott, I'll start with you. When we look at what is happening with regards to this particular decision, we're talking about how this can actually have a major impact on Russia. And of course, Russia is part of the Security Council as well. And so perhaps this is minimized. But even in terms of a symbolic loss, or in terms of Russia being labeled as a country that has been voted out of the Human Rights Council, will this have far-reaching consequences for the country?
I think you've summarized it well, that there's not as much practical significance. The Human Rights Council has no enforcement mechanism to hold Russia liable for the alleged war crimes. The Human Rights Council cannot impose any other punishment. But the symbolism here, the first time that a permanent member of the Security Council has been suspended from the Human Rights Council, it's vital, especially in the context of what we saw last week, what is being revealed in Bucha, with hundreds of civilians who appear to have been killed by Russian troops, some of them executed, by the likely revelation of more mass killings in places near Kyiv and in other areas of the country, in what has happened in Mariupol with the siege and the mass killing of civilians, and indeed the news that we're getting right now, that the missile strike, the Russian missile strike on a rail station on civilians, not military, on civilians in eastern Ukraine has killed at least 50 people, with that death toll likely to rise. In other words, this decision expelling or suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council shows that Russia, in a sense, should be accountable for its actions, and that if Russia does not want to atone for its actions, it will increasingly be isolated from much of the international community.
Yeah. Leonid, let me come towards you. How does Kremlin sees this suspension, number one, and number two, this suspensions, how would it affect Russia when it comes to, sitting with the Ukraine for talking peace? Would it affect?
the peace process?
No, first of all, we need to take attention that many media, many societies under influence of Western propaganda and fake news, because there was no any killing civilians in Bucha, because Russian troops left the
Don't do
city
this.
2
Don't do
days
this.
before video appeared, and mayor of Bucha and the police of Ukraine entered the city and done many videos, and there no any dead bodies. Second, strike of ballistic missile .O on railway station was from Ukrainian side, because it was missile .O. Russia not use this kind of weapon for decades. We use more sophisticated weapon systems. So it's very easy to track and to see, and from also to use satellite image. About human council in United Nations, I think it will not influence. Because first, United Nations is kind of system of influence. Let's see what happened in Colombia. Many civilians killed for last 2 years. Nobody helped it. Just see what happened in Kashmir. What decision? Nothing happened. So
All right, Mr. Savin. Scott, I believe you would like to respond to that.
Please don't do this, my friend. Please don't insult us and insult the viewers by putting out disinformation rather than discussing this issue. There are hundreds of people who were killed in Bucha, civilians. We have seen the bodies. The bodies were there before the Russian troops withdrew, as early March the 9th. We have the satellite imagery. We have the videos. We have witnesses. We have the Russian military on audio talking about the killings. So please don't insult us. And please don't insult us now. Even as we are trying to figure out how many people have died in Kramatorsk by saying somehow it was the Ukrainian military that attacked its own civilians, when I think you probably know quite well that Russia does have stocks of Tuch-Ku missiles, and so do Russian proxy groups in eastern Ukraine. If we're going to discuss this, let us discuss it decently. Now, the wider
right, Mr. Savin, when we look at the Human Rights Council's decision, of course, this has come after a lot of evidence has come out as well, after so many countries have voted against Russia as well. Do you not think that this is a platform that has made its decision after a lot of check and balances as to what is going on the ground, the evidence that has come out, and so many countries have decided there must be a reason against it, no?
Many countries was under very hard pressure of United States, like Serbia, for example. Serbia voted against Russia before in the General Assembly of United Nations. But Serbian government and Serbian people 100% for Russia. The same about other countries, many countries, African countries, Asian countries, and just to calculate how many countries voted, and you will see that it's about 35% of world population just voted against Russia. So the rest support Russia, the rest just made like Pakistan.
All right, Professor Scott, I want to understand what goes into making such a decision in the Human Rights Council. What sort of factors are taken into account? What level of evidence is required before such a process can take place? Because I also want to understand perhaps why countries such as India have not been voted out from the Human Rights Council, since of course there's a lot of evidence in that as well. So what is the scale that is being judged at the moment?
Well, of course, the decision that was taken here is actually by the UN General Assembly. It takes a 2/3 vote in the General Assembly to suspend someone from the Human Rights Council. Now, what happens in the General Assembly? There's a level of evidence which is presented before the General Assembly. But it is not a court of law. It's not a legal process. It's not like jury here. We know that politics go into the decisions that take place. And so, for example, we know that politics have come over past cases of whether or not to suspend someone from the assembly. But in this case, let's look at the politics around the vote, which again was 91% to, I believe, 28 with more than 50 abstentions. Why did both India and Pakistan, for example, abstain on this motion? It's not because they support the Russian disinformation. They know it's disinformation. But in the case of India, it's pursuing a very careful balancing act right now, given its military and its economic ties to Moscow. It doesn't want to upset Moscow by even calling this an invasion. And similarly, let's look at Pakistan. I believe you're in the midst of, let's say, a bit of political discussions right now around your prime minister and around your military. The prime minister had wanted to draw closer to Moscow. He had been in Moscow on the day that the invasion took place. His government does not want to upset the Russians, and thus Pakistan abstains as you face your own domestic situation. And we could go country by country on this. But at the end of the day, despite the politics, and despite Russia's own lobbying to try to avoid the suspension, in the end, you still have this historic decision being made.
Right. Mr. Savin, when we look at the Russian mission's memo that was given to different countries, it states that there are going to be negative consequences for countries who voted against Russia as part of the Human Rights Council. What does that even mean when we look at the options that Russia has, or why would it put out this memo to different countries with regards to having severe consequences? Was it a threat?
No, Russia already under the sanction of more than 8,000 from United States and Western camp. But it means that Russia just will surrender to the West, because our economy is resilient and we are successful to rebuild economic system and after 2014, and we are ready to continue in our and technologies. We are not of dollars. Of course, some Russian tests already in the West, but it's not possible to isolate Russia from the world itself, because many countries continue to cooperate with Russia, from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America. And the collective is not itself. It means that we're just in the moment where we see
So it means that Russia is not going to actively go out against the countries who voted against it in the Human Rights Council. Yes?
Of course, there will be counter-sanction mostly against the West, the Western countries. And yes, we will develop bilateral ties. Of course, we will not impose sanctions against Serbia. We understand that this country under hard pressure of the West, like many others, because United States have many tools and instruments how to influence developing countries to block some loans from World Bank, IMF. It's practice used many years by United States.
Leonid, if we look at, I think a month ago, we heard from your Kremlin that you discovered around 30 biolabs in Ukraine. I just wanted to know, what's the update on that? Was there a sort of dossier created by you and taken to some kind of organization, a global organization, to peek into it?
Yes, it was presented in United Nations just recently, a few days ago. There was dossier about biolabs sponsored and organized jointly with Pentagon. Yes, it was presented. It's also problems. Information blocked in the West, what Russia provided. So I just recommend to visit the website of Russian Ministry of Defense and also official organization just to check what happened.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yes, Sana, I just wanted to set the record straight. Earlier, Professor Lucas was saying that the fact that Pakistan abstained might be source of any kind of friction within our own state. I just wanted to remind everybody that back in 2014, when there was a different government and there was invasion of Crimea, even at that time, Pakistan had abstained. So this might have more to do with the state policy rather than any government policy. I don't know how to actually square this circle, but this is what I thought that should be actually submitted to you.
And Pakistan has always maintained very good relations with Ukraine in past as well. So, and even this Prime Minister, he has been highlighting straight away that we only want them to see both of them on the table of the talks rather than in the battlefield. So, Pakistan has always been maintaining the same
yeah, but
policy.
we are essentially saying two different things. I was just setting the records straight.
All right, Professor Scott, I also want to talk a little bit about the evolving situation with regards to the Ukrainian crisis. Well, we understand that Russia has been put under a lot of sanctions, and it is harming the country to some extent. But again, we've talked about Putin and the way that he goes ahead with his decisions, and how that is going to be perhaps more personal than anything else. But when we look at the situation in Russia at the moment, do you think that any of the sanctions that are currently in place are going to have any impact towards peace? Or do you think that it's becoming less and less an option for Russia to back away from this conflict without risking any sort of face saving?
Well, certainly Mr. Savin, who's representing the Kremlin spine, will say they're having no effect at all. That Russia can have great economic links with all these other countries, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly Russia will continue to push the disinformation, like the biolab story in that dossier. Forgive me for laughing at it, but there's absolutely no substance to it. Just to remind the viewers out there, what actually happened is that Ukraine received advice from the Pentagon and from other countries, a number of other countries, about security to protect biological research, including preventing others from stealing the toxins, such as Russia. That's the actual story. Now, in terms of what's going to happen with the sanctions, look, at this point, Vladimir Putin has lost on Plan A. Russia was unable to get into Kyiv quickly. It was unable to detain and kill the Ukrainian leaders. It is now withdrawn from the north of the country. So we're now on Plan B. Can it grab more territory in the east and in the south of the country? And you need to watch two things here. One is you need to watch the state of the Russian military, in which we have reliable reports that 70% of troops in Russian forces that have had to go back to Belarus to replenish are refusing to serve in some cases. So does Russia have the strength to even carry out a ground offensive in the east? And secondly, in the sanctions, this is in the case of a squeeze. It's a gradual squeeze. It won't stop Putin if he's determined next week, next month. But as we move closer and closer, for example, to a ban on Russian oil and gas imports from much of the world, Russia will feel the cost more and more. So what we're going to see, I think, is a frozen conflict in the east and the south. I don't think Russia will be able to conquer much of the country, but I don't think Putin will back away until finally someone in the Kremlin, someone close to him, says, look, the cost that we are taking as a country is far too high to pursue your personal attempt to make Ukraine part of Greater Russia.
Right, but Professor Lucas, when you are talking about sanctions and their efficacy, let me ask you, if this kind of change of heart doesn't come in Kremlin, and if we are looking at the squeeze, as you very aptly put it, how many decades is it going to take for Russia to be convinced to withdraw from Ukraine?
Right.
Well, I mean, we are in the case, and this isn't a U.S. versus Russia thing, by the way. Let's just preempt that line. We're talking about much of the international community is now on board with the sanctions. Indeed, Japan just tightened the sanctions today. Most people from the U.S., from Europe, from Asia will tell you we're in a process where we're talking months now. We're talking months, which in effect is, to draw a term from the Cold War without making this a Cold War case, containment, that you're trying to contain the Russians from being able to take more territory. You're trying to get them back to the negotiating table and to lift the occupation where we can discuss the status of Ukraine, including the Crimea. That will take time because, at the end of the day, let's put aside all the chatter about NATO, the West, U.S. dominating the world, yada, yada. Vladimir Putin went into this, and Vladimir Putin does not give way easily. He doesn't believe, or he didn't believe, his own agency's reports about how badly the military was going, how bad the offensive was going. So it'll take time for this to sink in with them, I'm afraid.
Yeah, Leonid, in the beginning, of course, if we go through a few of the analysts, what they were writing is that Kremlin is only interested in Donbas area and Mariupol because of one reason, that they want to secure Crimea. And now when you have a hold of Donbas, I mean, Donetsk, and you have Mariupol with you, could we see a sort of a selective, withdrawal of the Russian forces from Ukraine and coming on the table once again for, dialogue?
The goal of Russia and Ukraine was officially demilitarization and denazification. It's not only about Donbass, it's about general Kiev's regime suppressing about the half population in Ukraine. Because many people not like to be under such kind of regime after 2014. I just need to remember that in Mariupol, during the civil riots, Kyiv sent armed troops to the city just to press civilian protest. It's not only Mariupol, also Odessa, Kharkiv, many cities. So, of course, Russia can reorganize strategy in Ukraine and will liberate other regions like Kherson, for example. Kherson city is now free under Russian control. And there will be probably new independent states like Lugansk Republic and Donetsk Republic. It will be satellites of Russia.
All right. Thank you very much. We're almost out of time. Scott, any last words?
I just think it's a really bad omen that Mr. Savin, reflecting that line, has really used those buzzwords, denazification, which is now being linked to de-Ukrainification in the Russian media and Rio Novosti. That tells you the extent of what Russia wants to do. It wants to dominate Ukraine until it no longer exists as an independent country. That goes far beyond the Donbass, that goes far beyond Mariupol. And it also means that type of language, denazification, de-Ukrainification, will sanction more mass killings of civilians because you're doing it supposedly for this idea that all Ukrainians might
Thank
be
you
Nazis.
so much, Professor Scott Lucas and Mr. Leonid Savin, for joining us and sharing your views with us on the debate and talking to us at length about what is the future of the Ukrainian crisis as well. We're going to, of course, cover the Ukrainian crisis and other stories on the international front, and also be looking at the political situation of the country as well. We'll also be joining you tomorrow with regards to the political situation for a debate special, so stay tuned for that as well. Have a nice weekend and see you tomorrow.